Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, The Ball Over the Hedge. On fine days, Longford Green looked exactly as a respectable English village ought to look. The hedges were neatly clipped, the stone cottages wore their ivy like carefully chosen scarves, and the church steeple presided over everything with quiet authority. It was the sort of place where people still nodded to each other in the lane and where a bicycle bell could be heard long before the rider came into view. On this particular Sunday afternoon, the sky was a gentle blue with small white clouds drifting lazily above the rooftops. In the garden of the Hartwell cottage, 3 children were attempting to turn the modest rectangular patch of grass into a football pitch. "Don't kick it so hard, Billy," Tom called, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Mum said if it goes next door again, that's it. No more ball." Billy, the youngest at 6, clutched the bright red rubber ball to his chest as though it were treasure. "I'll be careful," he said solemnly, which, in the code of children, meant he would try for about 5 minutes and then forget. Alice, aged 10 and very sure she knew best in all things, stood between them, hands on her hips. "We should make a rule," she declared. "No high kicks. Only along the ground. Like passing in hockey." "This isn't hockey," Tom muttered, though he accepted the rule. The Hartwell children had learnt the hard way what happened when things went over the back hedge. Beyond that hedge lay the garden belonging to Mr. and Mrs. Grimshaw. It was larger than the Hartwells and better kept. Mrs. Grimshaw's roses were the pride of the lane, although some people whispered that she cared more for them than she did for her husband. Mr. Grimshaw, a thin, fussy man, favoured pressed trousers, polished shoes, and silence at inconvenient moments. Neither of them had much patience for children. "Right," said Tom, positioning himself at one end of the garden. Alice in the middle, Billy at the back. Quick passes. No sky rockets. He rolled the ball towards Billy, who stopped it with one foot and grinned. The game went on, a little clumsy, a little noisy, but full of innocent energy. Mrs. Hartwell sat by the kitchen window, peeling potatoes and listening to her children's voices with half an ear, the sound as familiar as birdsong. For a while everything went well. The ball trundled across the grass, bumping lumps and dandelions, while the children shrieked with laughter. Then Billy, desperate to impress, forgot every rule he had solemnly agreed to. "Watch this shot," he cried, pulling his leg back far further than was wise. "Billy, no!" Alice began, but it was too late. His small foot connected with the ball, sending it soaring upwards in a perfect, beautiful arc that would have looked magnificent on any football pitch. The 3 children watched in helpless horror as it sailed higher than the washing line, higher than the hedge, and then disappeared from view with a soft, distant thud. There was a heartbeat of silence. "You've done it now," Tom said, misery flattening his voice. "Sorry," Billy whispered, eyes wide. From next door came no immediate sound. No shout, no exclamation. The Hartwell children held their breath. "Maybe it's all right," Alice said at last, though she did not sound convinced. "Maybe it just landed on the grass." Tom fetched the wooden stool that usually stood by the back door and carried it to the hedge. He climbed up, steadying himself with one hand on the rough wood. "Well?" Alice asked. Tom's head appeared above the hedge and he squinted into the Grimshaw's garden. He could see the immaculate rose beds, the straight gravel path, the little bench under the apple tree. The red ball lay half in the border, half on the path, touching the soil around a particularly tall rose. "It's near the roses," he reported. "I might be able to lean over and grab it." Before he could attempt it, a crisp voice cut through the air. "What do you think you're doing?" Mrs. Grimshaw appeared on the gravel path as though the ground had conjured her up. She wore a beige cardigan, a long skirt that barely moved when she walked, and a pair of violet gardening gloves still stained faintly with soil. Her grey hair was pinned back severely, and her mouth already carried a line of disapproval. Tom froze on the stool, feeling much taller and much guiltier than he actually was. "Our ball went over, Mrs. Grimshaw," he stammered. "I was just going to get it back." She stepped closer, looking down at the ball. Her eyes narrowed. "Your ball," she said, "has snapped the stem of my rose." Alice and Billy, still in their own garden, exchanged a worried glance. Mrs. Grimshaw bent down, examined the nearest rose bush, and let out a small, offended hiss. "Look at that," she went on. "Ruined." This is what happens when children are allowed to run wild. Tom, who had never thought of himself as particularly wild, felt his cheeks burn. "We're sorry," he said. "We didn't mean." "Sorry." Mrs. Grimshaw straightened up sharply. "Sorry does not mend rose stems." She glared past Tom, as if she could see directly through the hedge and into the Hartwells' kitchen. "Your mother knows full well these games are a nuisance. I told her the last time the ball came over, did I not?" "Yes, Mrs. Grimshaw," Tom murmured. He reached down towards the red ball, but she moved quicker, scooping it up in her gloved hands. "This is mine now," she said firmly. "That's not fair." Billy burst out, unable to keep quiet any longer. "It's our ball. Mum bought it from the shop in town." Mrs. Grimshaw looked scandalized at being shouted at by a 6-year-old. "I will not be spoken to like that," she snapped. "You may tell your mother that I am tired of her lack of discipline. If she will not keep you under control, I shall speak to the council about disturbances." She turned on her heel, the ball in her hand, and marched back towards the house. The door closed with a decisive slam. Tom climbed down from the stool slowly. Alice swallowed, chewing on her lip. Billy stared at the hedge, his small fists clenched. "I hate her," he whispered, with a child's fierce simplicity. "Don't say that," Alice said automatically, though at that moment she was not sure she disagreed. Mrs. Hartwell had heard enough through the open kitchen window to come to the back door, drying her hands on her apron. "What's happening?" "Did the ball go over again?" she asked. Tom explained in halting sentences, his eyes avoiding his mother's. When he described Mrs. Grimshaw taking the ball, Mrs. Hartwell's face tightened. "She took it? After all that fuss last time? Really, that woman," she pressed her lips together. "Right. Stay here, you three." She stepped out into the garden, shoulders squared, and walked to the gap in the hedge near the gate that separated the two properties. The children, of course, followed at a distance, close enough to hear but far enough to pretend they were only playing near the fence. Mrs. Hartwell rang the Grimshaw's bell. After a brief delay, the door opened. Mrs. Grimshaw appeared, still wearing her gloves, the red ball nowhere in sight. "Yes," she said coldly. "Eleanor, I understand the ball went over," Mrs. Hartwell began, keeping her tone civil. "I'm very sorry about that. The children were told to be careful. But I gather you've taken it." "I have kept it," Mrs. Grimshaw corrected. "As a reminder that you cannot let them shriek and kick things about without consequences." "My roses." "Your roses are very beautiful," Mrs. Hartwell said, though there was a faint edge to her voice now. "But surely you can't expect there never to be an accident? They're only children." "That," replied Mrs. Grimshaw, "is evident to everyone. Some of us would prefer not to be reminded every 5 minutes." Mrs. Hartwell flushed. "You've been complaining ever since we moved in. You called them hooligans in the shop last week." "Mrs. Perkins told me so. I merely stated that the lane was quieter before." And now you're keeping my boy's ball like some sort of punishment. The temperature of the conversation rose by several degrees. Words sharpened. The names of various witnesses were invoked: Mrs. Perkins, the vicar, the milkman. The children's faces grew solemn, sensing that this was several steps beyond their usual squabbles. What none of them realized, as they stood in that narrow patch of ground between two modest houses, was that this small quarrel, born from one thoughtless kick, would stretch far beyond hurt pride and a confiscated toy. A stone had been dropped into the still pond of Longford Green. The ripples had only just begun. Chapter 2: The Village Takes Sides. In Longford Green, news did not travel. It migrated, slowly at first, then quickly once it caught a favourable breeze. By Monday morning, the affair of the ball had reached the shops, the church porch, and the benches by the bus stop. And as often happened with such matters, the story had grown ever so slightly in the telling. At the bakery, Mrs. Perkins announced to her audience of 3 that Mrs. Hartwell's children had nearly destroyed Mrs. Grimshaw's prized rose bed. Outside the butcher's, Mr. Tranter declared that Mrs. Grimshaw had confiscated the ball to teach them a blessed lesson. The vicar's wife, who had never found conflict palatable, suggested that perhaps everyone ought to remember Christian charity, to which no one quite knew how to reply. By mid-morning, the village had neatly divided itself into camps. Those with children of their own tended to side with the Hartwells, recalling with affectionate irritation the times their own offspring had broken windows, dented fences, or painted unexpected surfaces. Those without children, or who preferred their garden silent and immaculate, leaned softly in favour of the Grimshaws, muttering darkly about noise and respect. Meanwhile, in the Hartwell house, the atmosphere simmered. Mrs. Hartwell spent the morning polishing the sitting-room table with unnecessary force, pausing only to glance out of the window towards the Grimshaw's cottage with narrowed eyes. Mr. Hartwell, who had been working in the garage repairing an old chair leg, was dragged into the matter as soon as he stepped into the kitchen. "You know she's taken Billy's ball," his wife declared, arms folded. Mr. Hartwell, brushing sawdust from his jumper, asked, "Has she?" "Whatever for?" "For having the audacity to land in her roses," his wife replied. "And she was terribly rude about it. I'm tired of being polite to that woman when she treats us as though we're squatters." "Perhaps I should go round and speak to Grimshaw," Mr. Hartwell offered, hoping that a civil conversation between men might smooth things over. "By all means," Mrs. Hartwell said. "But don't come back without that ball." Obliged, and not a little apprehensive, Mr. Hartwell marched around to the Grimshaw gate, tugged the bell, and waited. After a considerable delay, the door opened to reveal Mr. Grimshaw himself, tall, thin, and pressed into a shirt that looked chosen more for dignity than comfort. His sparse grey hair was combed so precisely that one suspected he had used a ruler. "Ah," said Mr. Grimshaw, blinking as though visitors were an affront to his schedule. "Hartwell." "Good afternoon," Mr. Hartwell began. "I wanted to speak about the children's ball. My wife tells me—" "I'm aware," interrupted Mr. Grimshaw crisply. "The matter has already been addressed. The ball caused damage. My wife has decided upon a consequence." Mr. Hartwell frowned. "A consequence?" "Good heavens, Edmund, it was a 6-shilling rubber ball, not a cannon shot. If there's damage, I'll gladly pay for repairs." "We do not require compensation," Mr. Grimshaw replied, chin lifting. "We require consideration." "Which is precisely what I'm offering," snapped Mr. Hartwell, losing patience faster than he'd intended. "Give us the ball and we shall ensure the children are more careful." "There is also the matter of the noise," Mr. Grimshaw added. "Your children shriek like gulls. My wife says it has become intolerable." Mr. Hartwell stood very still. "Are you saying you intend to keep the ball?" "That," said Mr. Grimshaw with a tight little smile, "is what I am saying." The door closed with the same precision that had combed Mr. Grimshaw's hair. Mrs. Hartwell heard about the encounter within minutes, and her indignation grew wings. "Well," she exclaimed, pacing the kitchen, "that is simply beyond reason." The children, though not invited into this adult theatre, understood enough to sense escalation. Alice and Tom tried resuming their game using a rolled pair of socks, but it was a dreary substitute. Billy sulked on the kitchen steps. The next day the quarrel found new fuel. Mrs. Grimshaw was overheard by Mrs. Perkins at the post office describing the Hartwell children as little hooligans. Mrs. Perkins, ever helpful, repeated the comment word for word to Mrs. Hartwell at the greengrocer's. Mrs. Hartwell stiffened visibly and replied that she supposed it must be pleasant to care only for roses and not for other human beings. Mrs. Perkins carried this remark back with equal speed. The cycle might have cooled had it not been for fate and an additional kick of curiosity from village society. On Wednesday morning, the lane saw the arrival of Mrs. Price from number 7, a tall woman with an umbrella she wielded like a sceptre. She had heard from the milkman that the dispute concerned a ball, roses, and possibly legal action. This last embellishment was entirely the milkman's invention, but it did wonders for the drama. "Legal action," gasped Mrs. Perkins. "I wouldn't put it past her," Mrs. Price replied with relish. "The Grimshaws are very particular about their property." The suggestion worked its way through Longford Green like smoke through keyholes. By afternoon, several villagers were convinced court proceedings were imminent. Mr. Hartwell, returning from the bus stop with the evening paper, was accosted by Mr. Tranter at his garden gate. "Sorry to hear about the trouble with the roses," Mr. Tranter said. "If you end up in court, let me know. My brother-in-law had a similar case. Judge ruled it was the neighbour's duty to secure the rose bed properly." "We're not going to court," Mr. Hartwell protested, horrified at the notion. "It's a silly misunderstanding. Over a ball." "Ah," said Mr. Tranter, nodding sagely, "that's how these things always start." That same evening Mrs. Grimshaw was seen through her window, telephoning her sister in Bristol. The conversation, though inaudible, involved much gesturing, dramatic pointing at the hedge, and the general air of someone describing a siege. Mr. Grimshaw sat in his armchair reading the Times, refusing to be pulled into theatrics, though once he lowered his paper long enough to remark, "They might have asked for permission to retrieve the ball, you know." Mrs. Grimshaw responded, "They could have taught those children manners years ago." The children themselves felt the weight of adult tension without quite understanding its mechanics. Alice tried to reason it through one evening as she brushed her hair. "It all started because Billy kicked too hard," she said. "No," Tom countered from his bed. "It started because Mrs. Grimshaw is horrible." Billy, curled under his blanket, whispered, "I didn't mean to do it." No one reassured him. They were too busy replaying the chain of events. By Friday, the lane was thoroughly divided, the quarrel firmly planted in every mind. Passers-by walked slower past the two houses, as though the hedges themselves might reveal the next chapter of the drama. But still, nothing had happened that could not be mended with a cup of tea, a returned ball, and a few contrite apologies. Nothing yet hinted that within days, police officers would stand near that same hedge taking statements. And that a celebrated Belgian detective would be summoned to Longford Green not for roses or balls, but for blood. Chapter 3: The Body on the Gravel Path. Saturday morning dawned clear and cold, with a light breeze stirring the leaves along Longford Green Lane. The milkman, perched atop his rattling bicycle, wound his way between the cottages, depositing bottles by familiar doors. It was a ritual that calmed the village, marking the start of another predictable day. He reached the Grimshaw house shortly after 7:30, wheeled into the small front gate, and approached the doorstep with two glass bottles clinking faintly in his carrier. His first thought, as he later recounted, was that the garden seemed unusually untidy for the Grimshaws. A watering can lay overturned beneath the apple tree, and a pair of gardening gloves had been left on the bench. He glanced around and then froze. At the edge of the gravel path near the rose bed lay the unmistakable figure of Mr. Grimshaw, his body crumpled awkwardly, one arm pinned beneath him, the other stretched toward the hedge as though reaching for something just out of sight. A dark, narrow trail of blood had dried against the white gravel, stark and shocking in the early light. The milkman stood as if turned to stone. Then, after a long moment, he set down the bottles with trembling hands and bolted for the gate, nearly colliding with Mrs. Perkins, who was out collecting her newspaper from the stoop. "What on earth?" she began, before the milkman gasped, words tumbling out. "Grimshaw, dead in the garden." Within minutes, alarm bells were ringing through the village in the uniquely English fashion of hushed voices, nervous pacing, and a flurry of neighbours appearing at their windows. Mrs. Perkins dashed back to telephone the police, while the milkman fetched Mr. Tranter from round the corner, partly because he fancied Mr. Tranter would know what one did in moments like these, and partly because the milkman did not want to stand near the body alone. The Grimshaw front door remained closed. Mr. Tranter hammered the bell until at last the door opened a crack. Mrs. Grimshaw appeared, pale, hair dishevelled, her cardigan misbuttoned. "What is it?" she snapped. "What on earth is this noise?" For a long moment neither man spoke. Then Mr. Tranter swallowed and said, "I'm very sorry, Mrs. Grimshaw. You had better come outside at once." She followed their gaze to the garden. Her breath caught, and she staggered forward until she was standing over her husband's body. Her gloved hand went to her mouth, and her entire frame shook. "Edmund," she whispered. "Edmund." If the scene had ended there, it might have been classified as sudden collapse, a stroke, a fall, or some cruel twist of fate. But the doctor arrived within 40 minutes and did not use the word stroke. He crouched beside the body, examined the skull, and straightened slowly. "This was not an accident," he said quietly to Constable Hill. "He was struck on the back of the head. A blunt impact." The constable stiffened. "Murder?" The doctor hesitated, then nodded once. "So it appears." Constable Hill, knowing the limits of his small rural authority, set a watch on the Grimshaw cottage and telephoned the county police without delay. Within 2 hours, a motor car had arrived carrying 2 officers from the division to begin formal inquiry. The village, meanwhile, rearranged itself into clusters of whispered speculation. By midday, the hedges separating the houses might as well have been partitions in a theatre, for every window facing the Grimshaw property was a private box seat. By late afternoon the Hartwells were informed. A knock at their front door revealed Constable Hill, looking solemn and uncomfortable. "Morning, Mrs. Hartwell. I'm afraid I require a word." The children, gathered at the kitchen table drawing pictures, looked up instantly. Mrs. Hartwell ushered the constable into the hallway and closed the door most of the way. "What's happened?" she whispered. "You look dreadful, Hill." "It's Mr. Grimshaw," the constable said. "He's passed." Mrs. Hartwell blinked in shock. "Passed? You mean?" "Murdered," Hill said, lowering his voice even further. "Struck on the head. In the garden." Mrs. Hartwell pressed a hand to her chest. "Good Lord. But who? When?" "Doctor reckoned sometime in the night or early morning." He paused, glancing towards the closed kitchen door. "I must ask, Mrs. Hartwell, did you or your husband have any disagreement with Mr. Grimshaw recently?" The question slid like ice down her spine. She thought of the ball, of the words exchanged at the gate. "We had a quarrel," she admitted. "Over the children's ball." "But surely you don't think—" "It's routine, We're asking most of the lane." After taking a short statement, Constable Hill left, but not before Tom, unable to control his curiosity any longer, burst into the hall. "Mum, is it true? Is he really dead?" Mrs. Hartwell hesitated, torn between protecting youthful innocence and acknowledging stark reality. Finally she knelt beside him. "Yes, love. Mr. Grimshaw has died. The police are looking into it, so we mustn't spread rumours or frighten Billy. Do you understand?" Tom nodded slowly. But children understand more than adults imagine. Billy overheard anyway, and the news settled on him like a heavy blanket. At 5 o'clock the county inspector returned, this time accompanied by a smaller, impeccably dressed man with neat moustaches, polished shoes, and the air of someone who noticed everything worth noticing. The Lane watched discreetly from windows as the pair entered the Grimshaw house. Whispers began at once. "Who's that with the inspector? He looks foreign. Perhaps Scotland Yard." No, yard men don't wear shoes that shiny." The milkman, who claimed to have superior eyesight, declared, "I know who that is. That's the Belgian detective. The one from the papers. Hercule Poirot." The name travelled down the lane and through the shops faster than the morning milk order. By the time Mrs. Perkins told Mrs. Price, it carried an air of importance that made the scandal seem larger, darker, and infinitely more interesting. Inside the Grimshaw sitting room, Poirot removed his hat and gloves with ceremony, placed them on a side table, and regarded the inspector. "You will permit me, Inspector, to examine the garden?" "Of course, Monsieur Poirot." As Poirot and the inspector stepped outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the gravel path, shadows that, to the village, might have looked ordinary, but to Poirot, were the introduction to a puzzle. He surveyed the roses, the gravel, the overturned watering can, the faint blood trail, and the footprints, many small, a few larger, preserved imperfectly in the morning dew. He knelt near the spot where Mr. Grimshaw had fallen, touching the gravel lightly with his fingertips. "Ah," Poirot murmured. But already the little grey cells begin to hum. The inspector frowned. "You've noticed something?" Poirot smiled faintly. "I have noticed many things. But to understand them, we must know not only what happened here, but what happened in the minds of those who quarrelled." And in Longford Green, minds had been stirred far more violently than anyone had first suspected. Soon enough, Poirot would knock on the Hartwells' door, and the matter of a simple red ball would become a matter of life and death. Chapter 4: The Method of Poirot. Hercule Poirot approached the Grimshaw garden with a delicacy that contrasted starkly against the grim subject matter at hand. He stood with hands neatly folded behind his back, head tilted slightly, eyes gleaming with controlled curiosity. To anyone watching from the windows across the lane, of which there were several, he appeared almost theatrical. Inspector Goodwin, who was leading the official inquiry, cleared his throat. "Body was found here," he said, pointing toward the section of gravel near the roses. "Likely struck at close range. Blunt instrument." Poirot nodded once. "The blow, Inspector, is seldom merely a matter of muscle. It is a matter of motive, of passion, of opportunity. Without these, the hand does not rise." He crouched to examine the gravel. A thin dark stain ran across several stones like a line drawn with ink. Poirot touched one stone lightly with the tip of his finger. "Dry," he murmured. By the time the milkman arrived, the blood had ceased to be red. "So we may place the attack at some hours before dawn." Goodwin consulted his notebook. "Doctor estimates between midnight and 4 a.m. Poirot looked up. "And the Grimshaws went to bed. So the widow claims." "No witnesses." Poirot's eyebrows lifted. "A difficulty we must rectify with questions." He turned first to the roses. Mrs. Grimshaw's roses were more than decorative, they were cultivated with reverence. Each stem was precisely trimmed, each bed weeded to immaculate standards. And yet, Poirot noted this with interest, one cluster of stems bore fresh bruising, as though something had pressed or scraped against them during the night. At the base of the bushes lay a torn violet glove, half hidden beneath a laurel shrub. Poirot lifted it using a pencil he carried in his waistcoat. The glove was small, likely a woman's size, and bore a faint smear of something that could have been resin or varnish. Goodwin watched him. Belongs to the widow, I imagine. She gardens often. Poirot smiled a little. So she says. He folded his hands behind his back once more. Tell me, Inspector, who has retrieved footprints? The inspector gestured to a young constable with notepad in hand. Hill here recorded the impressions before people trampled half of them. Hill reddened. Some are children's footprints, sir. Couldn't tell whose. Some belong to adults. One set heads toward the side gate. Poirot followed the path of footprints with his gaze. They led toward a small wooden shed near the back fence. As he walked toward it, the smell of turpentine grew faintly stronger. The shed door was locked, and a padlock hung from the latch. Curious, Poirot said. The tool shed of the gardener, locked tightly the morning after the death of the gardener's master. Goodwin frowned. We'll force it if need be. No, no, Poirot said, raising a hand. We shall ask first. Always the polite method. Inside the house, the interview with Mrs. Grimshaw was less polite. She sat upright on the sofa in the sitting room, hands clenched around a lace handkerchief, eyes rimmed in red, though Poirot noticed no tears had fallen recently. Her cardigan was immaculate now, hair smoothed and pinned, composure restored as if grief itself had been tidied away for company. Madam, Poirot said with a gentle bow, please accept my condolences on the death of your husband. I regret that circumstances require questions. She sniffed. It is dreadful. Edmund was never a strong man. His heart troubled him. It was bound to happen sooner or later. Poirot regarded her steadily. The doctor says otherwise. Her eyes flicked sharply toward him. Doctors can be mistaken. Not in this case, Poirot replied. He was struck from behind. Silence tightened the air. Poirot resumed, voice soft but precise. You went to bed at what time? A little after 10. We are early sleepers. And Monsieur Grimshaw? He retired at the same time. Did he sleep beside you? She hesitated. No. He often slept in the guest room due to his snoring. Poirot folded this detail into the architecture of his understanding. You did not hear him rise in the night. No, she said quickly. I would have heard him. The floorboards creak. Poirot nodded once. Was there tension between you and your husband because of the quarrel with the Hartwell children? She stiffened. Their behavior was unacceptable. My roses are valuable. And your husband? He agreed with me. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, but madam, agreeing is a thing that husbands do. Feeling is another matter. Her lips thinned. Are you implying something? I imply only that tempers were inflamed. Where the tempers go, sometimes the hands follow. Mrs. Grimshaw stood abruptly. This line of questioning is distasteful. I will not be accused in my own home. Poirot inclined his head. No accusation, madam. Only observation. And now I must ask about the glove. He held up the violet gardening glove with its torn edge. Mrs. Grimshaw's eyes widened for an instant, too quickly for a prepared response. Poirot caught it neatly. That, she said stiffly, is mine. I must have dropped it while working. Yesterday? Yes. Poirot looked at the fresh smear of resin. It spoke of a more recent hour. He did not contradict her. Not yet. After leaving the Grimshaw house, Poirot made his way to the Hartwells. Mrs. Hartwell opened the door herself, eyes tired and expression taut. Oh, she breathed when she recognized him. The detective. Madam, Poirot said, bowing. I require a few words, if you will permit. She ushered him into the sitting room, where Tom and Alice peered from behind the doorframe, pretending not to listen. Billy was nowhere to be seen. You had a quarrel with the Grimshaws this week, Poirot began. Yes, Mrs. Hartwell said, straightening. Over a ball. Over roses. Over nothing, really. And yet tempers rose. They always rise with that woman. Poirot studied her. You did not go next door last night. Certainly not. My husband and I were home. The children were put to bed at 9. Poirot nodded. And the ball, madam? It was confiscated. Yes. Her expression hardened. She still has it. Poirot made a small sound. One wonders if a ball may roll further than one expects. He stood. I shall speak to your children as well. Mrs. Hartwell looked reluctant, but she nodded. Tom and Alice entered, sitting side by side in identical attitudes of guilty curiosity. Poirot knelt to their eye level. Tell me, Miss Enfants. Did either of you go into the Grimshaw garden last night? Both shook their heads vehemently. And Billy? Poirot asked. Alice's eyes flickered briefly, too briefly for an adult, but not for Poirot. He stayed in bed, she said quickly. Poirot thanked them, rose, and left the house. As he stepped through the gate, he allowed his eyes to travel once more along the hedge, dense, tall, and full of secrets. Already, the threads were forming. Some were bright, some frayed, some deceptive. And among them, inevitably, lay the truth. Chapter 5, The Web of Little Clues. The village of Longford Green possessed a peculiar energy in the days following Mr. Grimshaw's death, an energy composed of curiosity, fear, quiet gossip, and a desperate hunger for explanation. Every cottage window became a vantage point. Every idle conversation became an exercise in sorting truth from rumour. Yet while neighbours whispered freely to one another, they spoke far more cautiously when confronted by Inspector Goodwin and the meticulous little Belgian at his side. Poirot, however, preferred to gather his insights not from loud declarations, but from the quiet corners where details often hid. The inquiry began with Mr. Hartwell. He sat at his kitchen table with folded arms and an expression torn between grief for the tragedy and irritation at being drawn into the centre of it. Look, I admit my wife and I argued with Grimshaw. But good heavens, Inspector, quarrelling about children's games doesn't make one a murderer. Poirot nodded sympathetically. No, monsieur. To argue is human. To kill, far less common. And I was home all night, Mr. Hartwell continued. You can ask my wife. The law permits that we do, Inspector Goodwin said, not unkindly. Poirot allowed his gaze to wander subtly across the kitchen, never missing the small things. Tools lay upon a nearby counter, wood glue, a brush, and a small tin of varnish. The room smelled faintly of timber. Poirot approached. You are a man of handiwork, monsieur? Mr. Hartwell blinked. I tinker a bit. Chair legs, the odd shelf. Did a door for Mrs. Price last winter. Poirot lifted the varnish tin. This is turpentine-based. Yes. Why? Poirot replaced the tin gently. Because it produces a smell very similar to that of the Grimshaw tool shed. He pivoted. Do you know what tools Mr. Grimshaw kept? Only small gardening bits, Hartwell said. Trowels, secateurs. Maybe a hammer, I suppose. Poirot nodded. And did you return to the Grimshaw property after the quarrel? Of course not. Poirot did not press further. The anxiousness with which the denial had been given was already noted. Mrs. Hartwell, when questioned alone, displayed more composure but no less animosity. "I won't pretend I liked Edmund Grimshaw," she told Poirot frankly. "Or his wife. They made living here feel like trespassing. But we are not violent people, Monsieur Poirot." "And what of the ball?" Poirot asked. "It's still with them," she said bitterly. "Billy cried half the night about it. God knows what they've done with it." Poirot made a small thoughtful noise. "Perhaps, madam, that ball will yet tell its own story." Next, Poirot visited Mrs. Perkins, the village's unofficial news agency. She was perched on a garden chair like a queen on her throne, flanked by teacup and tapestry, ready for interrogation as though rehearsed for the role. "Terrible business," she sighed. "And right after the argument, too. Some say it was fate." Poirot smiled politely. "People say many things." "What do you say, madam?" "I say temper makes fools of all of us," she confided. "I heard shouting that night. About 11, I think. Could have been earlier." "Male voices?" "Female." "Male," she said. "One very sharp, clipped voice, that'd be Grimshaw, and the other deeper but quite angry, could have been Hartwell, I don't know." Poirot considered it. The inspector wrote hastily in his notebook. "Did you see any movement?" Poirot asked. "I saw someone by the hedge," Mrs. Perkins admitted. "Couldn't tell who. Looked small, though. Like a child." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "A child is seldom the murderer, madam." "But a child can witness," she replied wisely. Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed." The next visit was to the carpenter Mr. Fenton, whose workshop smelled of sawdust and fresh pine. Fenton rubbed his chin when told of the tool shed. "Edmund did ask me to repair a hinge a fortnight ago," he said. "And he ordered turpentine and varnish for a bit of refinishing." Poirot's eyes brightened. "And was the shed always locked? With Edmund around?" "Always. He was terrified children would borrow his tools for mischief." Poirot placed a hand to his chest theatrically. "Ah. The eternal war between the order of the adult and the chaos of the youth." Fenton chuckled. "Sounds about right. Did he ever misplace his key?" Poirot asked. "Once," Fenton said. "Found it tucked inside a gardening glove. Odd place to put it." Poirot nodded slowly. "Most odd." The day drew into late afternoon, and Poirot decided at last to speak with the village's youngest witnesses. He was careful. Children, Poirot believed, told the truth not because they respected truth, but because they lacked the social fear required for lying effectively. Adults complicated matters. Children revealed them. Tom and Alice sat stiffly on the Hartwell sofa, shoes swinging above the floor. Billy lingered in the doorway until Poirot beckoned him closer with a gentle smile. "Miss Amos," Poirot began softly, "you heard something the night Monsieur Grimshaw died." The children looked at one another. Alice bit her lip. Tom stared at the floorboards. Only Billy met Poirot's eyes, wide, uncertain, and already heavy with unspoken burden. "Rontel," Billy whispered. "Mum will be cross." Poirot patted the space beside him. Billy climbed up. "Madam, your mother wishes only that you tell the truth," Poirot said. "And Poirot, he likes the truth very much indeed." Billy nodded once. "There was shouting," he said. "Last night. Before bed." "And after?" Poirot asked. Billy hesitated. "I got up for water," he admitted. "I saw the light by the hedge. Someone was there." Poirot's breath was quiet. "Someone? A big someone or a small someone?" "Big," Billy said. Bigger than Tom. Tom flushed at the implication. And what did the someone do? Poirot asked. Billy fidgeted. They took our ball from the bench and threw it into the shed. Then they shut the door. Poirot's eyebrows rose. Into the shed? Not into the house. Billy shook his head. Into the shed. And the light, mon petit, where did it come from? Billy pointed. From their kitchen window. Poirot turned to the inspector. A child does not weave such complexities for amusement. The ball was moved after dark. The shed was entered. The quarrel continued long after bedtime. The inspector shut his notebook with a snap. That gives us much to ask the widow. Poirot smiled slowly. Oh yes, Inspector. It gives us motive, timeline, location, and a curious little question. He tapped his temple. If the killer wished to hide at all, why lock the shed afterwards? And if Mrs. Grimshaw slept so soundly, how did the shed come to be locked at all? But Poirot was not finished. Before leaving, he bent down to Billy's level once more and asked, Tell me, mon ami, when you saw the someone by the hedge, did they see you? Billy's voice dropped to a whisper. Yes. And did they speak? Billy nodded. Poirot waited. Billy leaned in and murmured, They said, go to bed and keep quiet. Poirot stood slowly, the puzzle shifting in his mind with an audible click. The children had not merely heard the night's events. They had been tangentially pulled into them, witnesses after all. And in Longford Green, the smallest witnesses often revealed the largest truths. Chapter 6, The Village Under Suspicion. The following day arrived with a sky swollen with grey clouds, threatening rain but refusing to release it. The atmosphere in Longford Green felt much the same, thick with unspoken questions, heavy with tension, yet static for want of a storm to break it. Inspector Goodwin had arranged for several residents of the lane to be casually interviewed, though nothing was ever casual when a police notebook was open. The Grimshaw death had already begun to shape itself into a village spectacle, albeit one viewed through lace curtains rather than opera glasses. Poirot, meanwhile, spent the morning walking the perimeter of the Grimshaw property, peering into corners and pausing occasionally to gaze at the hedge that separated the house from the Hartwells. To the untrained eye, it was merely hedging. To Poirot, it was the dividing line of motive and misunderstanding. At 10:30, rain finally broke, sending villagers scurrying indoors. Poirot took shelter beneath the archway of the vicarage porch, where Reverend Sutton greeted him with mild surprise and polite deference. Ah, Mr. Poirot. Or is it Monsieur? I confess I'm never quite sure how to address famous foreigners with moustaches. Poirot bowed slightly. Monsieur, Reverend Sutton. Though I am also content with Poirot, for indeed, I have only one of myself. The vicar smiled, ushering him inside. Tea? I expect you have questions about the dreadful business. Most certainly, Reverend. They settled in a modest sitting room, the shelves stacked with hymnals and books of sermons. The vicar's wife busied herself in the kitchen, clearly attempting not to eavesdrop and failing admirably. You knew the Grimshaws well? Poirot asked. About as well as anyone knows their neighbours, the vicar said. Edmund was private. Reserved. Not unkind, but never socially fluent. Grace, Mrs. Grimshaw, was sharper. She liked things just so. Poirot stirred his tea. And did they quarrel often? The vicar hesitated. Not loudly. But I suspect they disagreed quietly, which is often more dangerous. Quiet resentments are like mildew, they grow in darkness. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Very good, Reverend. And did Edmund Grimshaw ever confide anything to you? Once, the vicar said reluctantly. Months ago, after a service. He mentioned feeling cornered at home. I assumed he referred to marital strain, though men seldom give specifics. Poirot nodded. And the matter of the Hartwell children's ball. That was unfortunate, the vicar conceded. I tried to encourage Christian forbearance, but Grace did not take kindly to being advised. Poirot thanked him and left soon after, satisfied that a new thread had been added to his tapestry. Back at the Grimshaw house, Inspector Goodwin had taken Mrs. Grimshaw into the dining room for formal questioning. Poirot listened from the sitting room, not because he lacked permission to participate, but because he understood that an eavesdropping ear often perceived tones more frankly than a face-to-face exchange. Mrs. Grimshaw was defensive. Her answers were clipped, rehearsed, and curiously untouched by grief. Yes, I heard voices the night Edmund died. No, I did not recognize them. No, I did not get out of bed. Yes, the shed was locked. I have no idea where the key is. Probably in Edmund's coat pocket. Goodwin asked, and where is the coat? I burned it. There was a frozen moment of silence. You burned it? Goodwin repeated, as if the words were a foreign currency he could not convert. It was stained, Mrs. Grimshaw said briskly. He got varnish on it. I could not keep it. Poirot could hear Goodwin's pencil pause mid-stroke. Madam, people do not burn clothing the morning after their husbands are murdered. It was my clothing to dispose of, she replied coldly. Poirot's eyes sparkled with interest. A lie was never more revealing than when wrapped in indifference. By noon the rain had stopped, and Poirot requested to examine the shed again, this time with permission to unlock it. Goodwin procured the key from a jar in the kitchen, where Mrs. Grimshaw insisted Edmund had kept spares. The shed door creaked open slowly. Inside, the air smelled strongly of turpentine, varnish, and damp soil. Shelves held tools arranged with almost military neatness, trowels, shears, pruning knives, a hammer, a mallet, and several tins. Poirot's eyes paused on the mallet. Its handle bore faint dark specks. No blood, Goodwin observed. Poirot nodded. No. But the mallet is too heavy for a blow of the sort that killed Monsieur Grimshaw. It would crush rather than crack. He returned the mallet and instead examined the trowels. One bore a faint discoloration near the edge, dried, darkened, and subtly different from soil. Poirot held it beneath the shed's dim light. Inspector, have this tested. Goodwin called a constable to bag it immediately. And yet, Poirot said, it is not only the tool that interests me, but where it was found. On the shelf, Goodwin replied. Poirot smiled. Just so. And how did it return itself to so proper a place after felling its owner? Goodwin blinked. Meaning the killer put it back. Yes, Poirot said. Which suggests the killer was not panicked. Or at least not so panicked as to flee blindly. They tidied. Tidy murderers are rare. Goodwin scribbled. Poirot continued, and then, there is the matter of the ball. He crouched near a crate under the workbench and tugged it slightly. Something rolled out and bumped his shoe. A red rubber ball. Poirot picked it up gently. The ball of the children. Thrown here in the night. Witnessed by little Billy Hartwell. And not returned by morning. Goodwin scratched his chin. Meaning what? Poirot set the ball back down. Meaning that the quarrel of the previous day did not end at dusk. It continued into the night. He straightened. And when quarrels continue in the dark, they often change shape. By 3 o'clock, additional gossip had reached a feverish height, especially after Constable Hill was overheard at the pub whispering that the widow burned evidence. It did not matter that Hill was only speculating. In Longford Green, the villagers needed no more than a spark to ignite a theory. Mrs. Perkins asserted that Mrs. Grimshaw had killed her husband for peace and quiet. Mrs. Price countered that Mr. Hartwell had done it in defence of his family's honour. The milkman proposed that perhaps Edmund Grimshaw had been attacked by burglars who stole nothing because they were interrupted. Theories reproduced faster than rabbits. Yet beneath the surface of speculation, one detail unsettled Poirot far more than any rumour. The children had seen a figure by the hedge. A tall figure. Calm. Commanding silence. Commanding secrecy. Children did not invent such details. Adults invented alibis. Children spoke fragments of truth. That evening, as Poirot strolled back toward the inn where he was lodging, he was greeted on the lane by little Billy, who tugged his coat sleeve timidly. "Mr. Poirot," Billy whispered, "are you going to catch who did it?" Poirot smiled. "But of course, mon petit. Murder is a crime of disorder. And Poirot, he restores the order." Billy seemed relieved, until he added, almost inaudibly, "They saw me too, you know." Poirot paused. "The person in the night?" Billy nodded. "They told me not to talk." "And yet you have talked," Poirot said softly. Billy swallowed. "I didn't want anyone to die." Poirot placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Then you have been very brave indeed." And in Poirot's mind, a new piece slid into place, quietly, inevitably, dangerously. Chapter 7: The Gathering of Shadows. Sunday morning arrived with a solemn hush upon Longford Green, as if the village itself sensed that the investigation was nearing a terrible truth. Curtains twitched as Hercule Poirot made his characteristic walk from the inn to the Grimshaw house, umbrella in hand though the sky held only the faintest threat of rain. Inspector Goodwin followed several steps behind, already flipping through his notebook and muttering to himself. "Are you certain today is the day, Poirot?" Goodwin asked. Poirot smiled. "Inspector, murderers are like ostriches. They bury their heads in the sands of lies and hope we will not notice the feathers sticking up. But he tapped his temple, I am very attentive to feathers." Goodwin sighed. "It's your method I trust, not your metaphors." "I'm quite right, too," Poirot replied. Inside the Grimshaw house they found Mrs. Grimshaw sitting stiffly in her armchair, dressed once again as though a fashionable visitor were expected. Her cardigan matched her skirt, both shades of respectable grey. The room smelled faintly of lavender polish, and not a single book or cushion was out of place. "So," she said as they entered, "have you come to arrest someone?" Poirot gave a tiny bow. "Madam, before one arrests, one must understand. And before one understands, one must listen. You will permit us a few more questions." She gave a non-committal shrug. "If you must." Poirot took the seat opposite her. Inspector Goodwin remained standing, scribbling. "Madam," Poirot began, "your husband was struck from behind. This we know. We also know that a quarrel preceded the blow." "Ridiculous," Mrs. Grimshaw said. "My husband was a quiet man. He did not quarrel." Poirot tilted his head. "Ah. But the little grey cells do not agree with you. The neighbour, Mrs. Perkins, heard voices. Angry voices. At 11. Mrs. Grimshaw's jaw tightened. Neighbours should mind their own affairs. "Perhaps," Poirot allowed. "But you have given conflicting accounts, madam. First you say you went to bed at 10 and slept. Then you say you heard voices. Then you say you heard nothing. It becomes inconsistent." Mrs. Grimshaw's hand gripped the arm of the chair. "I was distraught. My thoughts were confused." Poirot leaned forward. "No, madam. Your lies are confused." She inhaled sharply, nostrils flaring. "Inspector! Am I to be insulted in my own home?" Poirot," Goodwin warned quietly. But Poirot held up a hand. "No insult, madam. Only truth. Your husband did not die peacefully. He died in anger. And anger must come from somewhere." Mrs. Grimshaw rose abruptly. "I refuse to entertain this any further. I will not answer another question." She swept from the room before either man could stop her. Poirot watched her go, eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Later that afternoon Poirot requested a meeting at the Hartwell residence. Mrs. Hartwell answered the door, looking tired but composed. "More questions?" she asked, stepping aside. "Only a few, madam." She ushered him into the sitting room. Mr. Hartwell, pipe in hand though unlit, stood by the mantel. The children sat at the dining table, colouring quietly. Poirot regarded them all. "I have learned much," he said gently. "But there is one piece still missing. A small piece. A child-sized piece." Alice and Tom looked up. Billy stared at his paper, gripping his crayon tightly. "Billy," Poirot said, moving closer. "You saw someone in the night. We know this. But tell me, what were they doing by the hedge?" Billy swallowed. For a moment it seemed he would not answer. Then words escaped him in a tremor. "They were arguing." That startled both parents. Mr. Hartwell stepped forward. "Arguing? With whom?" Billy didn't look up. "With Mr. Grimshaw." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah." And so the voices had witness not only in the ears but in the eyes. Mrs. Hartwell pressed a hand to her chest. "Billy, darling, are you sure?" Billy nodded slowly. "I saw them by the shed." Mr. Grimshaw was saying, "It's gone too far, Grace." And the other person said. He paused, then whispered, "Not another word." Poirot inhaled softly. "Grace." The name of the widow. Mrs. Hartwell's eyes widened. "You mean she killed him?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Patience, madam. That is for my final little speech." He turned to the inspector. "We have now the voices, the quarrel, and the timeline. But there was still the matter of the tool." "Madam Hartwell," Poirot said suddenly, "may I see the work you do with varnish?" She blinked. "Varnish? My husband does woodworking, not I." Poirot nodded. "Ah. But someone in this house has handled varnish recently." Mr. Hartwell looked confused. "Yes, I varnished a chair leg." "Poirot, what are you implying?" Poirot picked up a rag from the workbench in the adjoining garage. It smelled strongly of turpentine. The odour is unmistakable. And such odour was present at the Grimshaw roses the morning of the death. Mr. Hartwell frowned. "So what?" "It drifts." Poirot shook his head. "Not so strongly. And not only turpentine." He opened the rag further and revealed a faint speckling of resin dust. "That," Poirot said, "is from the Grimshaw shed." The children gasped. Mrs. Hartwell stared at her husband. "Arthur, did you go over there?" "What? No. Of course not. I haven't been near their shed." Poirot watched him closely. No tremor. No darting eyes. No swallowing. A truthful denial. "No," Poirot said pleasantly, "you did not." Everyone stared at him in confusion. "But someone else did," Poirot continued softly. "Someone smaller. Someone whose footsteps were found by the shed. Someone who witnessed more than they were meant to." Billy began trembling. Poirot knelt before him once more. "Billy, did you go to the shed?" The boy's lip trembled. I only went to get the ball. Mr. Grimshaw left it outside on the bench. I wanted it back. But they were arguing again. So I hid. Mrs. Hartwell covered her mouth. Oh, Billy. Billy nodded. I hid behind the roses. I saw them pushing. And then Mr. Grimshaw fell. Fell. Poirot repeated. Billy nodded. He didn't scream. He just fell. And then, Billy swallowed. Then she hit him with the trowel. The room went utterly silent. Inspector Goodwin breathed, "Good God." Poirot stood. So it was not rage at children, but rage at a husband. And the ball, he tapped his pocket, brought the boy to the scene. Mrs. Hartwell stared at Poirot. So that's it, then? She killed him. Poirot shook his head gently. No, madam. Not yet. To declare is not enough. One must prove. And Poirot will gather every witness to one room, so that the murderer may be stripped not only of freedom, but of illusion. He turned to Inspector Goodwin. Tomorrow afternoon, he said, assemble everyone in the Grimshaw garden. The living will gather where the dead fell. And with that, Poirot took his leave. Chapter 8. The Truth in the Garden. The next afternoon, villagers gathered behind twitching curtains and half-open windows, their gazes fixed upon the Grimshaw garden as though awaiting the final act of a play whose plot they had followed from the hedgerows. Inspector Goodwin had arranged chairs in a semicircle near the rose beds, precisely where Mr. Grimshaw's body had been discovered. Mrs. Grimshaw sat nearest the roses, spine straight, pearls fastened at her throat. Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell sat a little apart, their children close by, Billy clinging nervously to Alice's hand. Mrs. Perkins, Mrs. Price, and Mr. Tranter had not been formally invited yet somehow arrived anyway. Goodwin allowed them to stay, muttering that they might as well witness the end to prevent the start of 20 new rumours. Poirot stood before them all, immaculate in dark suit and immaculate moustaches, the late afternoon light glinting off his polished shoes. My friends, he began, we are gathered here not to mourn the dead, for that has been done, but to unmask the living. We shall restore order to Longford Green. For a murder is an act of disorder, and that Poirot cannot abide. Inspector Goodwin, standing at Poirot's side, cleared his throat. Proceed. Poirot paced slowly, hands clasped behind him. We begin with a quarrel, he said. A trivial quarrel. A child's ball, a snapped rose stem, and unkind words exchanged. That evening, tempers simmered. Yet tempers alone do not kill. He paused near the rose bed. But considered with motive, opportunity, and fear, tempers become more interesting. Mrs. Grimshaw's expression hardened. This is theatrical nonsense, Monsieur Poirot. If you have evidence, produce it. Poirot bowed. Madam, patience. We must first consider the timeline. He held up a finger. At 10 o'clock, the Grimshaws retire to bed, so says the widow. Yet at 11, voices are heard arguing in the garden. Mrs. Perkins, who has little reason to lie, confirms this. Mrs. Perkins nodded vigorously. Sharp as knives, those voices. Poirot turned to Mrs. Grimshaw. Already, madam, your tail begins to wobble. You say you slept. But your neighbours heard otherwise. I heard nothing, she snapped. I sleep soundly. Poirot smiled thinly. But you burn clothing the morning after your husband dies. A coat stained, you say, with varnish. You burn it before police can examine it. This is not grief, madam. It is concealment. Mrs. Grimshaw's lips pressed into a narrow line. Poirot continued, there is more. The shed was locked after the killing. But the key was not on the body. Nor in the house. Where was it? He reached into his pocket and held up a small brass key sealed in a police evidence bag. "In your gardening glove, madam." The very glove found torn near the roses. Mrs. Grimshaw's eyes widened despite her best efforts. Poirot nodded. "Clumsy. And yet tidy. You return the trowel to its place. You lock the shed. And you hide the key. A panic killer flees. A tidy killer tidies." Inspector Goodwin folded his arms, glancing at Mrs. Grimshaw. "You'd best start explaining." But Poirot raised a hand. "Not yet, Inspector. For the true motive must be laid bare." He turned toward the Hartwells. "You believed the quarrel was about your children. But it was merely the excuse upon which the true resentment hung. Edmund Grimshaw intended to move away. To sell the house. To end his wife's careful reign over roses, respectability, and routine. He was, as the vicar told us, cornered at home." The vicar nodded. "And last week," Poirot went on, "he called upon a solicitor in town regarding separation. Quietly. As dignified men do. But the news came to the ears of his wife." Poirot faced Mrs. Grimshaw directly. "And you, madam, could not bear it." Mrs. Grimshaw's voice trembled for the first time. "That is absurd, Edmund would never." But Poirot lifted a hand and the room fell silent once more. "He confronted you in the garden that night. The quarrel escalated. The ball, left on the bench earlier by little Billy, rolled beneath his feet as he stepped back. He slipped. He struck the gravel. He was dazed." Poirot paused. "It was then, madam, that you struck him with a trowel." A hush fell so deep the roses themselves seemed to listen. Mrs. Grimshaw stared at Poirot, colour draining from her face. "No," she whispered. He lunged at me. I only..." Poirot bowed his head. At last. The confession without the word. Goodwin stepped forward. "Mrs. Grimshaw, are you admitting?" But Poirot raised his voice one last time. "Inspector, allow me to complete the portrait. It is not only motive we must understand, but psychology." He faced the semicircle once more. To kill in rage is human. To hide in silence is fear. But to command silence from a child, that is calculation. He turned to Billy, whose hand tightened around Alice's. "You saw them argue. You hid. You saw her strike. And she saw you. And she told you to be silent." Billy looked up, tears forming. She said, "Go to bed and keep quiet." Mrs. Grimshaw covered her mouth. A sob escaped through her fingers. Poirot stepped closer, voice now gentle rather than triumphant. "You did not intend to kill him, madam. But when the body lay motionless, you believed it was so. And in that instant, fear overcame love. You locked the shed. You burned the coat. You told the boy to forget what he had seen. And you prayed the world would believe it was an accident." He bowed his head once more. "But the world contains children, madam. And children notice everything that adults wish they would not." Mrs. Grimshaw sank into her chair, hands shaking. "Edmund was leaving me," she whispered. "He was all I had. I only meant to stop him. Only to make him listen." Goodwin signalled his constables. "Grace Grimshaw, I am arresting you for the murder of your husband, Edmund Grimshaw." As the constables led her away, villagers watched from their windows, curtains lifting like hesitant eyelids. Poirot retrieved the red ball from beneath the bench and turned to Billy. "For you, mon petit. Without your courage, the truth would have remained trapped behind hedges and roses." Billy took the ball solemnly. Poirot walked toward the gate, cane tapping softly. Murder, he murmured to Goodwin as they departed, begins with disorder in the heart, long before it stains the ground. But the role of Hercule Poirot, he placed a hand to his chest, is always to restore the order. And with that, Longford Green slowly exhaled, the storm dispersed, and life, tinged forever by the memory of a quarrel and a ball, returned to its quiet English rhythm.